People who got fired on the first day of the job. What happened? Hired by a chain store. First day of work. Still in the back office filling out paperwork. Dealing with HR. Manager says to me, I sent in the automated personality test, and corporate says I can't hire you. I'm sorry, they did pay me for 1/2 a day though. If you ever have to take one of these tests, always answer report to my supervisor even if the correct answer is pull the fricking fire alarm and get as many people out of there as possible. All they are looking for is someone who is incapable of challenging authority. I just got hired at Sonic Drive-In. They had secret customers come in fairly regularly who order and eat the food, then judge the employees and restaurant on how well they handled company policies and stuff. Well, the current employees have been getting horrible grades lately, like the highest in the last 2 months was 68/100. The owner walks in and says the next person who gets below a 90 is fired. So on my very first day they put me on drive-through, which was a nightmare, and sure enough, I find out later that a secret customer rolled up. Owner comes back in at the end of my shift 8 hours later. Who was working driving through today? You got an 88. You're fired and then left. So that's how I got fired for being the best employee there on my first day. So on your first day you got a higher score than the previous secret shopper scores. You did better with no training than people working there longer. Yet they fire you. That owner or manager is definitely the reason why the scores are low. Pizza place. I asked what my pay would be and whether the training was paid. This was highly offensive to the comically Italian man who owned the pizza place, and he said that there was no need for me to come back. The pizza was awesome, though, so I still got pizza there. I wonder if this counts. I once got hired by a magazine to do some translation work. It was a freelance gig, so we didn't even do any official paperwork beforehand or anything. When I arrived, they said, "Oh, so sorry, we already had someone come in and do the translation." I was livid. I asked why I wasn't notified. They had no answer and essentially fired me on my first day. About 6 months later, I'm working somewhere else, and I get an email from the same local magazine asking me if I'd like to come in and translate some stuff for them. I was in a bad mood, so I went totally out of character and went off on them via email, but in a professional tone. I basically said, I do not respect you or your boss for treating me this way. Please do not offer any work to me or ever contact me again. 2 days later I get an email from them telling me that I've been fired for insubordination. Got fired on my first day at my first job. During high school, mixing custom colors at a paint store. I followed the formula exactly, according to the manufacturer's specifications, but the resulting color didn't match the sample. As mentioned here some time ago, the paint store owner fired me on the spot in front of customers, even though it turned out to be his fault for not having updated formula specs he had received from the manufacturer. That sucks, but it seems that you got out early of what would have been a crappy job. I applied for a public safety position at a municipality, legit medium-sized town of about 50k people, and got called in for an interview. I show up to be informed that this is a 3-part interview, first with HR, then a physical agility test, then a panel interview which includes the mayor, city manager and medical director. Mind you, I was never told about this process. It isn't in the job posting and I'm in a goddamned suit. I do the HR part, then go to the pat, look like freaking Rich Eisen running a 40-yard dash, only doing an entire pat, and show up decently sweaty at this panel interview. Fairly certain there is no way I'm getting hired for this job. I proceed through the interview. They ask some completely generic questions. I can understand some with a few job specific questions mixed in, but no, this is all if you were walking in the woods, what animal would you see questions. Then one of them stops the interview and says, "We've heard enough, can you come in tomorrow? Day after skip Thursday and come in Friday, that'll be your orientation." I said I didn't know I'd be working here tomorrow. I still need to give my other job a 2 weeks notice. Also, am I being offered the job? What's the compensation package? The mayor responds, "You work here now and you need to make us a priority. We can discuss pay after your orientation is over." WTF. I said I still need to give notice to my current job, to which he proceeded to tell me not to bother, we wouldn't be a good fit, and to turn in any equipment and uniforms. What equipment? What uniform? So I'm not sure if was fired, quit or never hired, but they sent me a check for 8 hours, so I think my story qualifies. You walk out, the door shuts, the mayor's head droops. Gentlemen, we just lost the best dang employee this municipality has ever had. First job at 14 as a busboy. Shown 500 things in the kitchen and thinking I would have to remember them all. Shows me how to be a host on top of all this. I say, can I do that tomorrow instead, as I wanted to focus on learning what they showed me already. 10 minutes later I'm called into the office, handed $20 and told I'm not what they are looking for. It was a good life lesson. Hey, a lot of restaurants are like this. I got hired as a busboy at one when I was in high school, and they wanted to fire me after my first day because I didn't already know what to do. This was my first job as a 14-year-old. The manager of a local bagel place told me I could work a few days a week in the summer. I worked my full first day, toasting bagels all day. The owner came in at night to pick up the cash and told the manager that they didn't have the money to pay for a new employee. I was told not to come back. I did get free bagels from there though. The manager still remembers me and it's been over 10 years. Hired by a Michelin star restaurant for my first ever job. They expected to take me on and train me up on the job and pay less for me than already trained staff. But when a member of staff didn't turn up, I had to attempt silver service with no knowledge. Obviously I failed, so I ended up polishing cutlery with the owner of the restaurant. We got talking. He said he saw potential in me to do better things in my life and just said that I should never follow his footsteps and put my passion for food ahead of my other passions interests, as it will ruin my life. Later he talked to the manager at the time, told me I could use them as a reference for future jobs, and I was given a week's rather than a day's pay. I got a job as a waiter at a, supposedly, new upscale restaurant. My first day was the day that they opened. We had to be there at 8 AM in order to get everything ready for the grand opening. I didn't know that scrubbing floors on my hands and knees was a part of my job description as a waiter, but I did it anyways, in my brand new perfectly clean uniform. By the time 3:30 PM rolled around, none of us had gotten any breaks, so I asked my boss if I could take a lunch break. He said, yeah, I'll give you a break. You're fired. As far as I know, the only thing that I did wrong was asking for a break. When I went back at the end of the week to pick up my whopping $20 check, most of the wait staff that I worked with was there too. It turns out that the boss fired a few more people, and the majority of the rest quit. The place went through several changes in management before it shut down about 2 years later. The parking lot was never very full even during peak hours. Got hired when I was young to a paintball field, and on my first day I was just supposed to observe a game and see what the referee does during the game, and got fired for not intervening when a player rushed too quick and close to an enemy, even though I was just supposed to learn that day. My friend tried to drive a golf cart without knowing the hose from the power washer was wrapped around the wheel, ripped the whole thing out of the wall. Classic. Forgot to check the wheel hose spool anchor. What a rookie. A friend of mine worked as a server at a cafe and was bringing chips and dip to a table. When he set the chips and dip on the table, he took one of the chips and dipped it and ate it in front of the customer and his manager. He was fired on the spot. What did he think would happen? Was the second or third day, but first day working with the boss. At the end of the day the shared till comes up short a little over $5. I know the exact transaction too. He was slow on the register, so I left it beside the till. It went into his pocket. He tells me I have to make up the difference out of pocket. I politely refuse and inform him that's not permitted by the Employment Standards Act. He blows a gasket and I leave with him yelling at me. He was fined $250. The sad thing is the woman who'd worked for him for 5+ years had been starting her shift by putting money in the till to cover any errors. She'd probably put in more than $1,300 while working for this jerk. The Chick-fil-A I worked at did that. I busted a nut and pulled up the page of the act and showed the manager, and he basically said, well, that's fair. If you called them out on stuff they wouldn't push it, but I know a ton of people who had to reimburse their drawers. Got hired for a warehouse position. Probably 15 years ago. Was 10 minutes late my first day because I lived 45 minutes away and the main highway got shut down due to a multi-car wreck. I called the boss and told him. He said no worries. Got to the job and was fired for being late. technically second day since day 1 was my interview and I did some training. I harbor a sleeping disorder that was at the time undiagnosed. This is important. I was to be there clocked in at 7 AM at a box factory, which felt like a conspiracy during training. Like we were just moving money around from cardboard folder to cardboard folder in a big circle. Giant slabs of cardboard came to us inside of huge boxes, which we then shaped into boxes and filled with slabs of cardboard and shipped out. I felt like the chain probably kept going infinitely until our same cardboard looped back around to us. Regardless, I was to punch in at 7 AM to join the circle of box life, and I woke up staring at a clock reading 11 AM and panicked. I immediately called my boss on a sincere "I am so sorry, I don't know how I overslept even though I'd lost jobs over it before, just never on day 1 and I can be there in 15 minutes. Are you freaking kidding me? Is this a freaking joke? Quit wasting my time." Click. I groggily stumble the frick out into the living room where my housemates are playing Guitar Hero, and I'm kind of in a state of shock because while I get 4 hours is an absurd amount of oversleeping, I've never been shouted at like that before. I start explaining that to them when it dawns on me one of my buddies who is currently trying to best his raining blood score should be at school right now. He has class on Tuesdays. "Trevor, you skipping today?" He looks at me and just reminds me his schedule. "Tuesdays and Thursdays." "Yeah dude, it's Tuesday. It's Wednesday, dude. I had slept from about 10 PM Monday night until 11 AM Wednesday. Now I'm on an anti-seizure drug and can live without being terrified of whether or not I'm going to be able to wake up the following day. But that is the only time I got fired on the first day. I lost a lot of jobs I didn't like over that crap. This is probably the best It Is Wednesday my dude story. Not fired, but I showed up for what I thought was my first day in a title. Was then told no, I wasn't hired for that job but for another one that I didn't apply for and for less money. I was thinking about my options when I went to break room to grab a cup of coffee. While pushing the lid down, the cup compressed, covering me and my white shirt and khakis. I went into HR and told them that it wasn't working out and I was taking this as a sign. Gave them a piece of my mind about their hiring practices and crappy communication, and bounced. Got a call from them on Friday asking if I wanted the job I thought I already had. Back in the late 80s, a guy was employed at a small factory I was working in. He vanished halfway through the afternoon and couldn't be found anywhere. He wandered back and about half an hour later eating a big ice cream cone. He was asked not to come back the following day. I got a job at a dry cleaning place in the back. Every time I stood up, I kept hitting my head on the rack thingy. Didn't matter how careful I was, it was always there. Pretty sure it was living and just fricking with me. Anyway, owner told me it wasn't working out on my lunch break. Sounds like you just weren't a good fit. I wasn't the person, but I used to work at a hospital delivering food trays. One day this new girl started. Very beautiful, very prim, very proper. She was apparently extremely rich and her parents had forced her to get a regular people job to teach her the value of $1. I'm not sure if she had made some fiscally unwise choices or if it was just a parenting method or something, but there she was with us. This job wasn't really dirty or anything. I mean, hospital environments are somewhat unpleasant, but all we did, we put pre-made food into ovens and then serve it to people. Cleanup was pretty gross but nothing extreme. Anyway, she couldn't believe that we had to handle food and push around these big carts. It was unfathomable to her. She thought it was putrid and difficult. She cried on the elevator on her way to deliver the first batch of food. I don't know if she quit or was fired, but I never saw her again. One of my nannies, when I was a little girl, was fired the first day of work. She asked my mother if she could go to her house for crayons, and since she lived a few blocks away of our house, mom said okay. 1 hour passed and she did not came back. So mom went to the house of the nanny and saw her drinking tea with her mother. She did not even bother to apologize. Mom told her to never come back, but the nanny did not understand what she did wrong. So she came back next day and sat in front of our door. Mom told her to leave and she never came back. I read this in a really posh accent. Went to an interview at a clothing store, mostly athletic stuff. Let's call them chair. So I show up to the interview, do the whole thing. Let them know I'll be on vacation soon, but I'm willing to work with them on that. I get a call later saying I'm hired and to come in to sign some stuff, and then I can start my shifts when I return from vacation. Awesome. So I return from vacation, give them a call, and they tell me a time to come in. I show up and they ask where my resume is. I told them I didn't bring one. They scolded me saying always bring a resume to an interview. I was not aware this was an interview, since I've already signed forms saying I was hired. I do the whole interview and ask at the end about the forms. The manager who had hired me no longer works there, and apparently that means I no longer work there either. So I get a call to come in for my first real shift. Turns out, it's an interview with another manager. So I'm sitting through this third interview after I've been told twice that I've been hired, and she says they'll give me a call. After a week, I follow up, and I'm told, like I said before, if we need you, we'll call you. I haven't called you, so we don't need you. Please don't call again. So that's how I got hired and fired 3 times and wasted $60 on parking for the process. I started a job as a student mechanic at my university. Paid like crap. $9 hour I believe, but it would help pay the bills and buy beer. Flexible around my school schedule. I'm a DIY mechanic and have done basically all of my own work on all of my 7 cars, from doing brakes, wheel bearings to replacing an engine. The job wouldn't be anything like that though, described as just basic things: oil changes, basic inspections, sweep up the shop, go on runs to the parts store if something was needed and couldn't be delivered, go on runs to pick up cars or drop off cars at an off-site shop, body shop usually. Didn't do body work on site. Anyway, I'm there starting the job. I'm tasked with power washing the undersides of buses, big vans. The underside of a bus is a gross place, especially in northwestern Ohio. Thick grease, sludge, etc. I'm not complaining though. It's 90 degrees with 110% humidity and sunny outside. I'm sweating my balls off on the ground covered in grease, power washing the underside of the third bus of the day probably. Hadn't really seen anybody except one guy showing me how to use the power washer and such. Then near the end of the day, I, drenched in sweat and water and grease, was approached by the manager who said something like, "You know, it seems like you're not really into the world. We really need someone motivated to get stuff done, and I totally get it if you don't want to do it anymore." I was like, "Da fuck." I had like 5 minutes total of interaction with other people on my entire shift. I mostly just kept to my own business power washing buses until my shift was over. I was pretty peed because I just did some of the most miserable work imaginable for hours for like $40. Who TF would be enthusiastic about that kind of work? Anyway, I wasn't exactly fired, but I didn't return for the next day. Got a much better job at a help desk for police court software stuff. Paid better, and I basically sat around the whole time watching YouTube or reading, taking the occasional phone call. I used to work at a warehouse that had a lot of temps and had a guy disappear after lunch on his first day. After asking around, I learned that he was riding circles around the island at the entrance to the industrial park, about a 12-foot loop, and the cops happened to ride by. They pulled him over and arrested him for what my manager claimed as being high as a kite, but he said he had lost his wallet and was just looking around for it. Place was kind of filled to the brim with people on something, from weed to coke. Even had a guy who would come in every day with a big water bottle filled with just orange juice. Sure. You have been visited by the traveling dog. Comment, I want travel so your boss can give you a free days and you can go on a trip. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.